Hello and welcome to this week's episode of The Deliberate Leader. And I am so lucky this week to be joined by Dr. Donna Lyon. Donna is an associate professor in film and television at the University of Melbourne here in Victoria, a filmmaker and also the CEO of 𝗬𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, which is an organisation which I'm very proud to be part of as a board director. 𝗬𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 is a survivor-led charity that empowers victims of child sexual abuse and gendered violence through trauma-informed boxing and writing programs. Donna founded the organisation really off the back of her own experience as a survivor and working out a way for her to really help deal with her trauma. So she now, runs a program nationally. We've got 600 people on the wait list, and the organisation is absolutely growing and growing very, very rapidly. Donna describes her leadership style as deeply informed by the trauma-informed practice. And through today's conversation, I'm sure that Donna's going to give us an insight into what that looks like for her and also how she's become a more deliberate leader. Enjoy this episode of the Deliberate Leader podcast. Welcome to this week's episode of the Deliberate Leader podcast, and I'm joined by Donna Lyon. Welcome.
Hello, Rita. Good to be here.
Yeah, it's so wonderful to have you here, Donna. It's so Donna and I work in the same organisation, which I'm going to let Donna kind of do the proper introduction to the organisation. But we've had I've had the pleasure of working with Donna now for I don't know, going on 8-9 months. It's probably getting on to a year, and I was really looking forward to this conversation today, Donna, because I know that you've got a leadership role in different aspects of your career and life, and so. I thought it would be super interesting for people to hear a little bit more about that and how whether leadership, whether you turn up differently as a leader in those different aspects of your life. So, thank you very, very much for coming on today.
Thanks, Rita. Great to be here.
And so what would be a good podcast without a question that you don't have any notice about, Donna? So I'll start with one of those. But for you, when you hear the term deliberate leader, what does it mean for you? What does it throw up?
Well, I had to kind of jump a bit onto the internet to try and get a bit of a definition. But before I guess I did that, I mean, I'm always thinking about kind of, just the pragmatics of any word. And, to be deliberate for me means to be intentional. And so I think that was my starting point, that understanding that deliberate leadership is likely a terminology rooted in kind of research and a theoretical framework, but which I know nothing about, I'll be honest. And that's the bit that I kind of had to look on the internet and go, oh, okay, oh, that's right, yeah, I kind of do those things and all that. But, just pragmatically, I am intentional with my leadership, and I'm not sure fully whether I have a kind of leadership ethos and style, but I do have a way of thinking and trying to be in this world that I think fundamentally comes into the way that I think about leading people and the organisation, particularly 𝗬𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏.
Yeah. And so I'm glad that the internet search threw up for you intentionality. It might also throw up some things like purpose-driven and a little bit of action orientation and kind of getting it done, but with clarity. So there's what I love about that whole concept of deliberate leadership is that it's very intentional, very purpose-driven. It can feel, so the action orientation aspect of it can feel kind of fast, but it's not always fast. And sometimes, there's that very intentional slow down because as we've seen, even through 𝗬𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, you can't do everything today. And we know that, like we've got a pace as a non-for-profit too. So I think we've teased people enough with 𝗬𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏. If they don't know what 𝗬𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 is, Donna, what is it? Can you tell people about what it is and what we do?
I can. It is a survivor-led charity that runs writing and trauma-informed boxing programs for survivors of child sexual abuse and gendered violence. And really, the program is led by lived living experience. And it's an 8-week flagship program that is about helping survivors to take back their power through creative and body-based practices.
Mm. And there's amazing work, which is what drew me, initially to the organisation. It's the work that you and the team are doing. And so it is a non-for-profit, which has been around now for how long, Donna?
Well, we registered the charity in December of 2022, hit the ground running. And so, really now, what's that been? Just kind of 2.5 years. A small startup organisation, I would say micro, but steadily on a quite growth trajectory, which has been enhanced by the fact that we have a multi-award-winning film, which is of the same name, Left, Right, Hook. And the right, for your listeners, is WRITE. So it's a kind of play on words. And the documentary follows a group of participants and victim survivors who participate in the Left, Right, Hook program. And it kind of extends beyond the 8 weeks, and it becomes this much larger story about people finding community and finding a way to essentially reimagine their experiences. And there's a lot of kind of vignettes and beautiful poetic moments that occur, and they kind of go public essentially with their stories. And the documentary was kind of it started out as a grassroots project out of my living experience as a survivor. I just ran it as in a local boxing gym. It was really palpable. There was an energy to it. And then I thought, oh, this could make a great documentary film and maybe a book of writings using the writing component generated from workshops. But then, of course, I'm an academic as well. So it was like, oh, maybe this should be a research project too. So it's all of these things. But the film kind of, in a sense, and the research came first. And out of that, then the charity was set up. Because really philanthropy said, what are you going to do when the film goes out there to the market? Because people are going to want to do that Left, Right, Hook program because it is, really quite incredible.
Mm.
So that's when I started on that journey of setting up the charity. And I think, we've, as we've got 600 people, over 600 people on the waiting list because of the impact of the film and its publicity. So it's really huge. And there's an absolute market that we knew was there with the stats of abuse, but the film has kind of shone this spotlight. And so, yeah, it will be interesting in the next 2 years as we steadily move to growth, maybe sooner than another charity of kind of our ilk, would have been going through.
Yeah.
Not sure.
The impact of it. So obviously, if people jump onto YouTube, they can see a little short, which is the way that I came across Left, Right, Hook. And now they've got the opportunity to see the film. Obviously, it's been screening everywhere across the country since late last year. I'm trying to remember, we had the launch at the Melbourne International Film Festival, obviously.
Yeah. World premiere at Melbourne International Film Festival, went into cinemas, currently doing kind of community screenings. So I'm off to Alice Springs, early April to do a screening and then a workshop. And then it goes on Netflix. So, from the 11th of April. So when your listeners are hearing this, they can just jump onto Netflix and watch it. And so, I'm just imagining that 600 people that we got on the wait list could all of a sudden be 3,000. We just don't know because of the Netflix effect.
Oh gosh,
it's fascinating to sort of be part of this journey, but also, a little overwhelming at times. So I'm not going to lie.
Of course. So, and it's such so the impact the organisation is having, and the very small amount of resources that it's got to do what it needs to do. Obviously, getting it out there through the film and the charity, and obviously the research, it enables it to get out there. And I can't wait for people to see it on Netflix. So yeah, jump on, because you'll be able to see it, and everyone can see it through that format and forum. For you, Donna, I guess because you've referenced that you wear multiple different hats. Like, you're the CEO of the charity Left, Right, Hook. You are also an academic. You are a filmmaker and a producer. So all those things that you do, when you think about that term deliberate leader, how does that play out for you in the many, many different hats and in the realms of your life?
Well, I'll go back a little step, because I always wanted to be a leader. And I think I had demonstrated leadership qualities, from a young age. I was just that type of person that was a bit of the doer or the one that would take on leadership roles, the organizer, whatever. So I think I might have migrated into those positions naturally because I just think that it's in my personality. But I don't think I was ever a very good leader for a very long time. And that was probably because of my trauma background and that lack of awareness around who I was as a person. And so, that's taken probably a lot of recovery and a lot of hard work on myself. And really a lot of kind of tragedy of having to really fall down and kind of build myself up because I didn't have very good foundations, simply because of my experiences. It wasn't my fault. I'm really a product of my experiences. I'm really a walking textbook case study of what it means to be a sexual abuse survivor. The research says it, we're risky in our behavior, we're prone to substance abuse, poor self-esteem, on and on and on I could go. And I was all of those things plus more. So, that deeply impacted the way I showed up in the world and the way that I related to people. I hit a rock bottom and I began to rebuild my life. And I was very lucky in that I landed a job at a film school, which is at the Victorian College of the Arts at the University of Melbourne. And I am grateful because I love learning. And so I was a bit of a lifelong learner. And so an opportunity came where I decided to do my PhD. And I think it was the beginning of doing my PhD that I began to kind of transform myself through education, through learning, through critical and reflexive thinking. And funnily enough, my research was in kind of action research. So, a little bit similar in a sense to deliberate leadership, where there's a very action-oriented methodology and process. But the deep reflective thinking underpinned that. And also a participatory mode of practice, which meant collaboration with others, essentially, in a kind of nutshell. And so that's a kind of the underpinnings of me beginning to kind of come into myself in a sense. And I think so. I guess I just wanted to kind of tease that out. And then I started, while being an academic, and I'm now an associate professor at the University of Melbourne, but I began to just throw my hat in the ring for lots of things. And so I just began to say, I'll put my hand up for that leadership position. I'll put my hand up for that leadership position. And that no one else was putting their hands up, and I kind of got it. And so I began to build up this kind of wealth of experience. And it was mostly in kind of teaching and learning. But I was a yes person. I was a doer. And that stuff served me very well. And then I got tapped on the shoulder to do academic women in leadership. So I wasn't my point is I wasn't particularly strategic. I just said, yeah, I'll do it. I'd see a problem. I could sort of fix it. I wanted to learn. I wanted to develop my skills. And I had a wonderful time doing that for the last kind of 8 or 10 years at the University of Melbourne. And then, of course, Left Right Hook kind of came along as a film and a book and then a charity. And I found myself as a CEO of a charity, and probably not ever thinking that I would ever do something like that. But seeing it now as the ultimate synthesis of all the skills that I've learned along the way. And I'm jumping around a bit, but I think it's just acknowledging that there is a big multiplicity of thinking and practice in who I am, as somebody that's kind of been grounded in the arts and filmmaking, and as a producer. So that's kind of my initial training. And a producer really takes a project from idea to execution to audience, and really takes a vision, an idea, as I said, a premise, a theme, along a continuum of connection points that reaches an audience for an impact, ultimately. And they cross into all areas of finance, technical, aesthetic, marketing, and I was just talking about it with my students earlier. So, you're a networker, you're an entrepreneur, you're a business person, you're an organizer, all this kind of stuff. You're not particularly very good at all of them, the reality is, but you have a good, broad understanding of all these things. And I think that's stuff that has really helped me be the person that I am, and has grounded me. So I think being a CEO now brings together all of the suite of skills. Yeah.
Mm. And you reference something really important, and that is that particularly at very senior levels of leadership in that CEO level, you go from being, the doer and having the responsibility for, a vertical, so marketing, IT, your resource, your HR, finance, etc., and having to have the oversight. I guess for you, because the business is still small but growing fast. What I see from the board perspective is that you've still got your finger on all of those pulses, and you need to have, right? Because the business is still at that age and stage. So I think, I want to commend you on that, because I think you do it extremely well. But I think a deliberate leader will kind of know enough across the areas, but also know when to put the hand up and go, oh, I need some help with this, or who can we get that's going to assist us with this?
Yeah. Well, one of the things I knew right from the beginning is when we started to get money is that I needed to outsource, and I wanted to bring on people to basically help me build. And that's exactly what I was looking for right from the beginning, rather than like paying necessarily me to be a doer, because I didn't want to be the doer. I wanted to be the overseer, but I knew exactly what it is that we needed. And so I just started to bring on people that could elevate and amplify a kind of vision. And I think that's what I've done quite deliberately and strategically to do that. And I do remember kind of getting some advice from somebody who said, you'll know when you can scale is when you can walk away from something, because, it's kind of on the ground running, and we're not there yet. So even though I've definitely got I feel that the people they're doing fantastic. I still need to be, I feel like I'm still 5 steps ahead of them, and I want them to be 5 steps ahead of me. And it just hasn't happened yet. And we're very close. We're very close. But I think that's a tension point of being at any growth stage is, how do you kind of not micromanage, let the team thrive and grow, but at the same time ensure that quality control is there, particularly as we're delivering such a vulnerable program. And I can't afford to have mistakes happen, because we're really, dealing with we're dealing with people with complex trauma. They need to be held and deeply respected.
And I think it's a really good point you raise around scaling. So for any leader in any team, and you could take scaling and take that term and go, well, it doesn't need to be you're scaling a business necessarily, but when are we ready for the next thing? And you've touched on a point there, which is your processes and systems need to be bedded down. So the leader could presumably walk away and the thing doesn't fall over, right? Because it doesn't have this single point dependency of the person, but it's a well understood and bedded down system.
Exactly. And, I do really like systems and procedures, but I also don't necessarily want to get in the weeds, and I want other people to build that and do it. And so, I think one of the great things about being a producer is that I'm a very good delegator. I don't want to be the one doing the Excel spreadsheets or the system build or whatever it is. I just want other people to do it. But my point is that I will need to always know what needs to be done, when, where, how, why.
Yeah, it's a vision, really. It's around vision, seeing the sum of the parts, and then being able to put in place whatever you need to be able to execute that.
Exactly. Yeah.
You talked earlier on about always knowing that you wanted to be a leader, and you referenced, being the doer, being the organizer. Was there did you, have any leadership roles as a kid, or you're firstborn in your family, or was there anything that kind of led you down that path anyway, do you think, or do you really think it is just personality?
Oh, look, it's funny. I was baby of 4. So, I don't know whether that's a common theme, but I guess I just think being somebody that was involved in the arts from a really young age, so like despite kind of coming from a abuse history, the great thing is that my mum enrolled me in drama. So I was enrolled in drama from the age of 7. And so I think that just activated, confidence in me and creativity. And then I just loved it. I loved imagining worlds. And I think that took me out of the trauma that was happening, and really protected me and saved me. And I'm, forever grateful for that. And I loved putting on things. I liked putting on shows. And so really from a very young age, I was making films and putting on plays and making short films and things like that, and probably punching well above my weight. Like I was a producer on a funded short film at the age of 19 years of age. That was in Perth, Western Australia, where the probably opportunities were a bit more abundant than perhaps in a bigger city. But I was showing responsibility beyond probably the age that I was at. And so I think that just started to it was just in my DNA, I think.
Yeah. And you mentioned also that as you've developed your self-awareness, you've enhanced the way that you lead. And that they weren't exactly your words, but you said, you were able to see the change, and it's because you're changing your leadership because you became more self-aware. What, upon, I guess, reflecting on that, what are the biggest differences in how you lead before you became more self-aware?
Well, I think I needed to face some really hard truths about myself, which was basically that I lived in fear. I was prone to misery and depression, and I really hated myself. And I needed to fundamentally begin to sit with the deep despair of that deficit model that I operated from. And I also was using drugs and alcohol as coping mechanisms and needed to stop that. And so I radically and fundamentally changed through becoming sober, becoming I went into 12-step recovery programs and kind of just did introspective deep work, obviously therapy, still in therapy 12 years later. And just so I really had to hit a rock bottom and kind of build myself from the ground up, that began to, start to, I mean, I don't even want to use these words, but I'll just sort of use them loosely, but like began to think about how can I, because it's not so much even a thing of like, how do I love myself? Because I don't know, like it's just still a journey, but it was more like, how do I build self-esteem? I think that's what actually it was. How do I build or develop self-worth? And that's actually how I had to start. And how I built self-worth for me was around taking action and achieving. Whether or not, and it wasn't actually for external validation. I did it for me. And actually getting my PhD was really for me. Oh my God, wow, I did it. Because I grew up being told that I was worthless and a piece of shit. So actually having a piece of paper was like, oh, maybe I can do it. And it was through taking this action and through achieving that I began to actually, in a sense, become a bit smarter, become more critical, become more reflective, and change. And so I'm really kind of grateful that I have that innate kind of action-oriented personality. And I just built worth through that. And, and then eventually I began to kind of embody it. And then I guess, importantly though, is that I think, beginning to apply trauma-informed principles. So I went and did trauma-informed leadership as a course and a certificate in trauma-informed practice. And that probably now has deeply influenced the way that I lead. And I think if I am to reflect on who I am as a leader, I think it's a person that is trauma-informed.
How so? Yeah, sorry.
Oh,
How so? Like, how has that, like doing the trauma-informed leadership and certificate, how has that changed the way that you lead?
Because I think what I began to do before I did that was that because I was leading Left Right Hook as a kind of project, I could see that I was implicitly leading from a trauma-informed lens because I'd been traumatized. And so my model of leadership was kind of relational and based on mutual trust and respect and collaboration, but I hadn't made explicit how I was doing that. And so the study got me to think about, how am I actually applying trauma-informed leadership into what I do? So when I think, number one is fundamentally understanding trauma. Okay. Yep. So understanding that that's your base. That's what we're operating with. Two, coming from an empowerment lens. How am I coming from an empowerment lens? What language am I using? How am I acting? How am I thinking about the world, about survivors? How am I thinking about myself? It's about collaboration. It's about building mutual trust and respect. Is transparency and communication and principles and processes. And I just began to make explicit the implicit. And I mapped it out. And then I just found myself migrating towards that in terms of who I was. And I've just begun to slowly embody that in everything that I do. And I now bring it into my teaching as well. I would say I'm a trauma-informed teacher most of the time, not, not always. But I have to be deliberate and intentional about it. Because I can very quickly, fall to the wayside of, not necessarily always acting with integrity, like most humans, I guess.
Absolutely, absolutely. What you're describing there, what's coming up for me is this theme of deep vulnerability, right? So you've explained there very, very generously the work that you've done in being, obviously, you share your story publicly. You've done it through the film as one of our survivors through the film and through other mechanisms too, and that requires a whole lot of vulnerability. For leaders listening, everyone's got, whatever story they've got, whatever, I always call it the invisible backpack that we have that, kind of is just filled with stuff. For people that don't know how to tap into that vulnerability and how to kind of use it in a way which still makes them feel empowered and strong, which you talked about, Donna, what advice have you got for them in order to do that in a way that doesn't break their confidence or, make them feel vulnerable, but in an unsafe way?
Yeah, I mean, look, I guess I see that there's great strength in being vulnerable. But you're right, it kind of needs to be done in a way that feels like it's empowering and safe, and considerate of other people, right? So we're not kind of thinking about just trying to trauma dump or, poor me or whatever. Like, I think it's important to consider one's positionality and lens and, acknowledge the fact that I am a white, able-bodied woman who has the privilege of having been educated. I've been able to get recovery and support, in big, part, not necessarily because I come from money, because I don't. I come from a pretty, low middle class family and really have had to do it on my own. But I've been able to work and, I've had those privileges. And now as an associate professor, like at a university, I have great privileges. And so I think positionality is really important when you're talking about, your living experience, because, my experience is based on that positionality as well. But I guess it's a personal decision, and not everyone needs to go and tell us their past histories. But I think there's a humanness in being able to be vulnerable and a humanness in being able to try and be authentic and relational. And so for me, leading from my living experience has been just life-changing. I am my real, true, authentic, messy, complex self. And I think I feel like it feels very aligned to me. when I lead and talk about my experiences, but I'm not doing it because I need your sympathy. I don't need your empathy. I don't need you to comment. I just need to say it. And I think people just need to make a decision about what is right for them. But I think we're interested, or I'm interested in the real person. I'm just not interested in masks or how perfect you are or anything. I think because I think life is really hard, actually,
Yeah,
and kind of messy.
that's right. And we see, I mean, we see it at all levels of leadership when there's leaders, I guess, that for whatever reason won't move into that space of authenticity and vulnerability, but in a way that fits with where they're at. You get this, there's almost a nickiness to it because they're hard to understand. Sometimes they're hard to trust. It's even hard for them to get a message across, to their teams and to their stakeholders, whoever that might be, because it's hard to pinpoint where is that coming from. Like, what's your why? What's driving that message, that intention? Like, it's hard. It's like picking up something and having to read it a few times because you're like, oh, the picture I'm getting here does not match with what I'm reading. And I think when we've got that lack of alignment with inauthenticity, I guess it really is quite off-putting.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, it's such a kind of hard question because it's like, I mean, I guess we try and do it like in film and television, right? Like, as people connect, deeply to authentic work. And so I don't know, I guess I've always been grappling and grasping for that, but I think it's like, who's the real you? I want to see the real you come through. And I just think that that can be a bit of a life pursuit and journey. And it's something that it's important to not force anyone to do either. And I think it's okay at times to like adopt masks or personas or try on things. It's like when I started doing interviews, like with podcasts and things like that, I wasn't very good, right? And who knows whether I'm any good now? Your listeners can decide if they're still listening. But I thought, I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to have the conversation and I'm going to do it clumsily and messily. And I am just going to get better because by doing things, you just get better, right? We kind of know that. And I think that's the authentic kind of pursuit to find self is like, just try. And it's okay if you fail and, that's okay. You'll get better and you just pick yourself up and dust off your boots and all of that. And I've just tried to take that robustness of attitude into everything I'm doing. And over time, I think I've become clearer and a bit more like I've found me and I can talk about me authentically.
When you just my reflections based on what you just said, there's a deep level of conviction because that level of there's a level of self-belief and conviction that comes with I'm just going to dust myself off and try again.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that does come from a deep level of trust, but also, as you say, a deep level of self-awareness to know that when it's all said and done, I'm going to be okay because I'm resourceful within, and that resourcefulness comes from within. I've got the skills that I already need to be able to kind of pick myself up and have another go.
Well, I think you have to have that resourcefulness if you want to be a leader, right? Because otherwise, don't do it. And it is hard, and don't get me wrong, and sometimes I sit there and go, oh my God, I don't know whether I can. And I'm sure lots of people think that. But the truth is no one's making me do it. I've chosen this. So I have to accept that personal responsibility. It's not like someone's grabbing me and going, you must be a CEO. I made that choice. And so I better show up. I better be intentional and deliberate about it. I better do a good job because that's the stuff that does satisfy me, but also knowing I'm not always going to do a good job. I'm human. I'm deeply flawed. And I think people I don't want to be perfect and I'm not interested in it.
The comment there about the choice and personal responsibility, Donna, is so important because when I talk to groups about deliberate leadership, I will often talk about the fact that you are to be a deliberate leader means that you're recommitting to leadership almost daily. It's like we may, we might look at a same mindset of recommitting to our personal relationships. Like our personal relationships go up and down with whomever that might be in your life, right? And I think that with leadership, it's much the same. But what I love in particular about what you've just said is that you said there's personal responsibility in that. I make the choice. And so if I'm going to show up and do it, then I'm going to do it. And I'm not doing it for anybody else necessarily. I'm doing it for me, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I definitely feel like kind of Left Right Hook has really changed me and made me just a more considered person. And I think I've always been looking for that thing that, is mine as well. Not to, I mean, Left Right Hook is a charity, so arguably it's a public benevolent institution. It's not mine, it's actually the public's. I could get fired at any point and somebody else could just take it over. And that's the kind of risky, of it all that I like. But I, still kind of like I founded it and it feels really special. And like I've got like 2 feet into something. And I've never really had 2 feet into anything because I've been scared or, all the rest. So it feels like, oh, I've got my fullness. Yeah, I think that feels really exciting.
Yeah. So from an academic leadership perspective, because I love hanging out with academics and I've spent a big part of my career in higher education. It's hard to get through the professorial level. You're at associate professor level. Are there any learnings from pursuing that academic leadership career that you also take into your role as a CEO of a non-for-profit?
Yeah, I mean, so many because yeah, the academic career was just kind of came out of the blue for me, not something that was I wasn't very good academically. I didn't think I was very smart. Just wasn't my yeah, just wasn't my thing. But I did love learning. And I think being in film and television as well, like, it's creative practice research is really what I do. And it's a little different from maybe like the STEM-based, fields. But, I would say now that like I'm a multidisciplinary or an interdisciplinary researcher, I love connecting with others. And so I think what academia has done is kind of really helped ground me in research and evidence-based thinking, and really thinking carefully around stakeholder management and narrative crafting and different methodologies and processes in which we apply our thinking. And it's just, I think, in a sense, systematized my thinking in a better way. And I think helped me make explicit a lot of the stuff that has been implicit. And so even like when I did my PhD, it was, I mean, my kind of PhD was just this mixed methods study where it applied filmmaking research, action research, or critical participatory action research, and then living action theory, and which was, and again, like, but part of that I still use because it looks at what are your living values, and how do you know that you are living out your values? How do we test and measure what we do against how we live out our values, understanding that we're human, full of contradictions, and sometimes we will never achieve that. And I love that because it fundamentally starts from a place of we are flawed. But that doesn't mean we're not going to aspire, and doesn't mean that we can't set benchmarks and start to test and measure ourselves against those benchmarks, and actually get reflective and evidence to help us know, well, how do I know that I'm doing what I'm doing right? How do, all of that. And so you're critically interrogating process. And so I think being in academia has helped me to enliven that thinking. And think about myself as a critical, reflexive, complex human being.
That it requires that huge a level of self-awareness. So I'll, leaders that struggle with that at times, I'll say to them, well, envisage yourself above this conversation and in it, so you kind of got to play these two roles. How have you been able to develop this? I mean, you've talked to us about the journey that you've been on, which helped you become more self-aware. As a leader, what do you do to, I mean, what you've said there is massive. Like it's kind of every moment really having an understanding of your values and then doing the cross check to go, well, am I acting in accordance with those values? How do you do it, Donna? How do you do it?
Yeah, it's funny. I actually genuinely think it's because of being in recovery for being abused, because I've had to begin to develop an observer self slowly. It's been hard because when that memory gets activated, like you're in trauma, right? And so what's happened over the years is life has been really compromised because I'm trying to want something, and then it gets diverted because I might be like triggered. I know it's a bit of a kind of buzzword, but you know, it's true. Like a part of your brain gets activated or triggered or and thing, and you kind of right back in the memory or right back in the sensation or the feeling, or you're shut down or whatever it is. That's hard, right? Because you kind of you're dancing between this, like I'm trying to be normal and functioning, which I am actually sometimes, and then I get this thing that happens and I'm kind of, everything goes out the window and I can't be centered and I can't be reflective and I can't be critical and I can't be anything other than this kind of damaged sense of self. That's what it feels like. But I have to then go into therapy, right? To begin to say, well, how do I help circumvent these automatic, sometimes what feels like really automatic reactions and responses? And that is through beginning to develop this idea of an observer self. And I think that is actually being fundamental to probably a deep reflexivity alongside, I would say, artists are deep reflective thinkers because they're thinking, what is my relationship with the object that I am working with or thing that I'm creating? And I think it's a wonderful grounding for people in life is to study the arts because of that. Because they begin to see themselves in relationship to an object within a context, and then it's relational and multidimensional. And I think through doing my PhD in particular, I began to really tease out that thinking alongside therapy.
There's something, when I hear you talk about that, there's something about being very present. And, you know, we know through mindfulness and even practices, you know, a lot around the Buddhist tradition, but there's that sense of being grounded in this moment. And as you talk about that, you know, like this being that observer, but also having this relationship with what it is that I'm creating and all the stuff, obviously, that would be, I imagine there's a lot about the impact and what it's doing for me, what I'm doing for it, like all of this, right? But it keeps you in that moment.
Well, it does, but the funny thing is I'm not somebody that can do mindfulness. And because I disconnected because of my abuse, like actually I'm like, oh, I don't know what that means. Like I just quite dissociated actually and fragmented. But again, I think the artistic training and, you know, and also the kind of pain that I got myself into and you know, need for recovery really helped me just to deepen my reflexivity in a way that mindfulness never could, meditation never could, any type of Eastern practices never could, because I could not just sit there and go, oh, I'm going to try and develop an observer self.
Yeah.
It's not for me. I'm not that type of person.
No, well, yes, because that's obviously been your experience, but it sounds to me like you're doing it anyway, but through a different way. Like
it's through a different way, exactly. And I think we can arrive at these points 100%. It's really interesting to call that out. So.
Yeah, because it sounds to me like it's a different method, but you know, maybe the outcome
is a bit similar. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you and me both, Donna. I'm not, I've done lots of meditation courses. In fact, I've downloaded an app right now and I'm trying very hard to practice in the morning. So, but I am a work in progress, as most of us are.
Yes, I am.
Hey, Donna, this has been such a beautiful conversation. I have been lucky enough to learn more about you in the last, 8, 9 months, but even through this conversation, it deepens, what I know, but it's really illuminated so many things about how you lead, and as an observer, but also a participant, quite actively involved in how you lead. You've given me so much food for thought around leading, but particularly around this concept of self-awareness, and really that is fundamental. And we know it. We talk about it a lot in leadership development, and to be a deliberate leader, we talk about it a lot. But I think, your story today has really brought that to life in a different way. So thank you. Thank you for being on the Deliberate Leader podcast today, John.
Thank you so much, Rita. It's so lovely to connect with you.
I've just had the pleasure of interviewing Donna Lyon on the Deliberate Leader podcast, and what a conversation. Donna was so very generous, and I know she would not like me saying that, but so very generous in sharing her story and really what has led her into a path of deliberate leadership, even though, she starts off by saying, oh, I don't even really understand the concept and whether I am a deliberate leader. And of course, we only choose deliberate leaders on this podcast, but Donna is the epitome of deliberate leadership. And what she really focuses on in particular in this conversation is self-awareness. And we're really invited through Donna's story to learn more about how she has become more self-aware through her trauma, through the work that she's done on herself, and now how she uses that in leadership, in the leadership of a non-for-profit as a CEO. The non-for-profit is Left, Right, Hook, but also in her academic career. So I really hope you enjoy this conversation. I know that I certainly did. See you soon.